And yet a lot of people look at, straight things, improving your efficiency rate. That's why I think that, for those of you who don't know what the DuPont model is, some do, to look at how the different pieces, asset turnover ratio, operating expense rate, how big interest is. Right now, interest isn't the problem. When it's 10, 12 up percent, interest may be a problem. If interest is your problem right now, where interest is 3 to 5%, you've got other problems that are causing you a problem. You ought to be looking at revenue and expenses on an accrual basis. And primarily because if you're looking on a cash basis, there's going to be a lag of at least a couple of years, whether you're going down or whether you've turned it around. Because one of the things when you turn around, you start building up inventories of feed, inventory of cattle, inventory of other things, and you're growing, which would show up on an accrual basis. Cash basis is going to say you're sucking the cash out of it. So I think there's a few, you don't need to figure every ratio in the world. I mean, the best, if you can find about 8 real important ratios, a couple in solvency, a couple in efficiency, a couple in profitability, a couple in liquidity, you're better off looking at those from multiple angles. Look at trends. If you're doing projections, how does your projection line up with what your last 5 years average has been? Maybe your Olympic average, drop the low year, just look at the last 5 years. If you are too far out of line with what you've been able to do before, you better have some darn good reason you can explain it to your lender why all of a sudden things are better. Maybe there's a reason. We've got a new contract, whatever else it is. We're now in a seed corn or differentiated product business if we weren't. Those sort of things that you're looking at. Ratios are easy. Financial statements are easy. The accounting system is a pain in the butt. I mean, what you really got to do to keep those numbers current and get. The other thing I see people doing all the time from a liquidity standpoint and making changes in business. One, I talked about this using these autopsies to periodically sit down with the management team and look about what happened, why it happened, were we lucky, did we have a reason for it, what assumptions we make were wrong, do we need better information on external things to make a better decision? That's important. But the biggest thing I think is monitoring. And this monitoring is what's actually happening relative to what we thought was going to happen on at least a monthly basis, or at least a quarterly, preferably a monthly basis, and looking at the variances and saying, why is this happen? Is it just a timing issue? Or something changed? Are prices lower, input prices higher, whatever else it is? So you spot it to either fix the problem before it gets too big, or take advantage of the opportunity. Everybody's got 20/20 hindsight. We always can see back. You don't want to think what could have been 6 months ago. What you can do about it. And when you spot the problem, then you got to do some analysis. Okay, the variances are off here. My expenses are higher than what I thought, and it's not just a timing issue. Then drill down into it and figure out what the cause is. Because too many people, and I use this example a lot, our political system is fraught with people who listen to the public opinion, the general press, social media, and make decisions in response to symptoms. They don't treat the underlying cause. And because of that, that problem will keep coming up and keep coming up and keep coming up. Learn something. I don't care if your neighbors make fun of you. You're not doing things the way we did them 20 years ago. That's right, and I'm going to be here in 20 years and you're not. Yes.
I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but we've had a good long run.
Yeah. Whoa.
Weak dollar at agriculture profitability. Are assets mispriced across the country significantly, a little bit? We have a pretty slow period here, or whatever.
Well, you got two problems. I mean, if you look at asset values, clearly land is the primary one. It constitutes 87% of the total assets of the farm sector. In some cases, there is a real bubble. I mean, land is way out of line with what it would earn if we had any real alternatives to put the money in. It depends on how highly leveraged you are with that. Hey, if I don't have much leverage, my land's gone way up, great, but I've got a lot of downside ability. But by and large, a lot of land's been bid up by the guys. Two things. Outside investors are coming to ag this time, outside of your area, because they saw that as a good way to, well, I'll use an example. I have two family offices in Dallas that each manage $3 billion portfolios. This is for multiple families. They're just managing the wealth. They came down and they said, we've looked at this and we've got a lot of our money in bonds. Okay. What we'd like to do, because the bond interest rates are that low and it turns out if interest rates shoot up, it's going to discount the value of our bonds. So we see land as a hard asset, as something that if you aren't in a hurry, I got to flip it over. Over time, land goes up. Not necessarily for 4 or 5 years, but over time, land has gone up. It's a hard asset. Nobody's going to take it away from us. Somebody, if you are buying productive land, somebody is going to farm it. Now, maybe they're paying $400 an acre cash rent for it now, and in those real bad times they're paying $150. But I'm still going to get a return off my land. And so these guys came in and they said, what we'd like to do, we don't want that much. We're only going to diversify our portfolio, so we're only going to put 10% in land. Well, that's $300 million for each of those. You know, it's just 10%. So what if there's people that have real money. But farmers, you know, the peace section, I'd say land is the most likely. The other two places going to show up as machinery, on new machinery that people have bought. If people aren't buying because things have gone down, the price of used equipment is going to take a real hit. Because there aren't many places in the world that do real great. It used to be we could move it to Mexico, we could move it to South America. Right now, those aren't that booming economies as Europe. And the other, you in the dairy business, probably more than others, because for whatever reason, dairy's been pretty good the last couple of years. Milk prices are going down a little. But people, because of droughts, because of in the beef industry, because of profitability on the milk side, low milk prices, low interest rates, low feed prices, low interest rates, and pretty good milk prices, and make pretty good money. And people have been bidding up the price of replacement heifers. I don't know what they're doing right now, but I know what they were doing a couple of years ago. That could have me, like people buying beef cattle to restock areas that were in drought that they liquidated their herds on. I think it's mostly on those things. They're capital assets, land, machinery, equipment, breeding stock in areas where there has been a particular late bubble because multiple things lined up in their favor, low interest rates, low feed costs, other things. But other than that, that's why I think there will be problems coming up, because I don't think this grain thing, unless a global weather situation hits, are just going to correct themselves in a year or so. Because we pushed out grain production, corn, soybeans, into multiple parts of the world that didn't use it because our technology is transferable. That technology, if they're willing to raise GMOs, has been transferable and is more adaptable to different conditions. But the other thing is I told you this the other day, 1980 The U.S. accounted for 80% of the corn that moved in the global markets. In 2012, it accounted for 20%. You said, well, why is that? Well, two reasons. One, we started producing ethanol in this country. So we weren't exporting our corn, we were consuming it domestically for ethanol. The other is because the prices kept going up. Argentina, Brazil, the Eastern Bloc, everybody else started growing corn, and they had some pretty cheap rates of growing it. Their land costs weren't high or anything else. Labor costs weren't high. So they started filling the gap. And that's why I don't think this will just come back overnight. We could have a bad situation in the U.S., we don't produce a record corn crop. Well, that'll help. But we better hope that Brazil and Argentina and a couple others have bad crops too, to bring those supplies down. And unfortunately, with Europe, the EU being on the brink of some problems again, it affects the buying power of our export markets. Sorry, I'm getting off on different subjects. This sounds like more of an extension outlook conference. It does any, but I think in terms of where you're going, understanding your financials and the position you're putting yourself in, recognize the importance of management specialization, because all the things we talk about in here, all the things you talk about, a lot of there, there's no way one of you can do all the specialized areas. You better, well, yeah, I got more things on my plate, TPAP come out of. I can't do all those. Physically, one person can't. You've got to prioritize them. You also either get an operation where you hire that expertise, or you join with others. You don't need to merge your operations to do it. Those three guys that went together and created that accounting service bureau. So we're only paying about a third of what it was going to cost them otherwise. And probably it helped the woman get better at it because she was doing more in agriculture. I think more of that stuff can take place without merging your whole operation, just being selective in terms of where can I really get some payoff here. And the payoff usually comes in spreading a fixed cost or in acquiring a higher level of technical capability, whether it's management or whether it's some technical area on the people side. Okay. Others? Geez, I'm too short. I walk in front of that, I look straight in the light. I don't use a phone. Okay. I don't use watches anymore. I use a phone. One of the things you're starting to see, most of you have come through a generation where you may be the 6th or 7th generation on your farm. But up until about 2 generations ago, it was still, we had it worked out where it was still the oldest son was going to take over. And it's only been in the last couple of generations where we started going to multiple siblings running it, and then to what's called cousin consortiums. In this last 3 years, we have, 2 brothers or brother or sister been running the operation. Now their kids are coming back, and you're getting people in there, and plus you're bringing in some non-family members that are key employees in the ownership. And I think you're going to keep seeing more of that as you go along. You don't have to turn it into a public company. In fact, as you really wouldn't want to. You want to keep it closely held to some extent. There are methods in selling stock and buy sells and others. You can cap how far you want to go in the ownership. But I think the idea of if farms do well, you're going to see more owners, but you got to find someone to create a market. Yeah, I don't want to. Sometimes people are going to have to sell because of divorce or health problems, and they're going to have to dump the stuff at a capital loss. But I think one of the ways you need to look at is how can I let those people that get an ownership interest earn something on it. One of the real problems right now in many family businesses where you got outside non-business active people that own a part of the business is they've got a great asset on the balance sheet that doesn't return crap. I mean, they're getting 1% return or something like that. You got Cargill, some of the others, that isn't the case. I mean, it's almost like they had preferred stock. I don't think it is, but their return rate is pretty much a market rate of interest. And hopefully with some growth potential in the base asset. It's not like a bond. You know, if you think you got good management where you can grow as land values grow, as the company gets bigger and stronger. I think that's important. I'll say this, I'm terrible at church. For those of you who go to church, because I play with all the little kids. I like, as I call it, short people, and then just because I'm short people, lots better than I do adults. So I will, if anybody's crazy enough to sit in front of me, I will play with their kids the entire time that my preacher's up there talking or whatever it is. The thing is, this has been a forever deal. Lately, I've been reading scriptures at weddings of kids I used to carry around like this. And so I figure, you know, it's one thing when kids come back to class, they say, my mother had you 20 years ago or something. Like, when it gets to the point, my grandpa had you, then it's time I left. Okay. Let me just stop rambling. Any questions? This is a business. Set your priorities. There's some things you've got to get started on. The vision statement, if you haven't done your estate planning, which you'll have to be reviewed, and started funding it for your own sake, unless you come out of businesses strong enough that this is going to take care of you, and communicate that to kids, this financial stuff, what conditions our business in, periodically update them and explain to them. We're keeping capital back this year because we think we're going to buy another piece of ground or we're going to have to upgrade our equipment line. Those are important. And then you're eventually going to have to develop job descriptions for when we start planning succession. What attributes are we going to, where's that going? What attributes are we going to need in the position? And it will be multiple positions possibly. That's going to be our successor, that might be the CFO or whatever else. So that when you start filling them, you aren't going to like this either. A family member ought to be thought of well and looked at a job as long as they're qualified and there's a job that exists. If they aren't as capable as the person that's looking at the job, or you think about creating a job just to give them a place to go, I don't think that's a good idea. I think that's a real detriment to the business. But they probably share some philosophies. You know quite a bit about the people that are coming back, their family members, and a lot of times people that are MDs and good businessmen for women have pretty good genetics. So it's family members aren't such a bad place to look for people either. I've asked a couple times somebody say things, so if that's, do you have any questions? You ought to know by now I have an opinion on everything. So, if not, the one thing I'd be encouraged to do besides the things I've mentioned already, going back and getting started on 2 or 3 of those beginning things, if you are not in a peer group, you can go get an advisory board and pay those people to come in. I'm one of those. But I don't know that I think that's better. I'd rather have 5 or 6 other really, really progressive farmers that have been there, done that have a different point of view as my advisors. I think you need special. If you've got conflict in your family, you ought to have somebody come into some of these family meetings and handle that conflict for you. There are people that do that. There's people in this room that do that. But just in terms of as ongoing business advisors, continuous management improvement, some programs, but I think a peer group could do that for you. You're going to have thick skin, because if you really want to get a lot out of it, you need to be honest, and you need to almost invite criticism. You don't need to just take it. They don't have any governing power over you, like the former board of directors. But you want them to tell you what they think and what they see. The real value is getting different points of view. The trouble is most close-sale businesses, that doesn't happen, or it happens in the heat of the moment, or people have learned, you are der Führer, and it is my best bet not to piss you off, because it affects grandchildren's other things and relationships within the family. These guys, I'm not trying to just pick on you and put you down, but I don't see it that way. My experience has told me you ought to look at this, think about this. I think you got a real weakness here. Nobody is good at everything. There isn't a single area you can't get better in. That's the Tom Peters quote that I used. If it ain't broke, you probably haven't looked hard enough. And by that, he doesn't mean it's crashed on the side of the road. It can get better. But even though everything can get better, you've only got so much resources. You need to put your time in on things that, when they get better, have the greatest payoff. But it's a continuous learning environment. And I would encourage you to do that. Be open-minded, continue to learn. There's a lot of opportunity. There's some negative things on the, what do they call it, on the horizon, that will affect some industries more than others. But this is a cyclical industry. It goes up, it goes down. Those are going to happen. You want to position yourself to weather the storms. And the other thing, we had one year of this in Apex. Right before 2008, all the guys called me and said, we'd like to have a special meeting of Apex this summer, which looks at how do we mitigate risk, how do we position ourselves to make it through if this thing craters. The other thing was wouldn't have gone real well in a standard extension meeting. We also want to be positioned to pick up the pieces of the people that don't make it. And that's how they grow. It's buy cheap, sell high. And oftentimes, if you've got the right position, when things get low, that's the time to go and buy. There is a lot more downside in it right now. You can pick it up. Thank you. Okay.